Hello, this is Clarence Moye with Words Daily here with Three Body Problem co-director Minkie Spiro. Minkie, so nice to meet you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure, my pleasure. So as we were joking, and of course you're co-director, you directed episodes 4, 5, and 6 of this initial season. And as we were joking before we started recording here, I was so happy that you were smiling because I that's not the face of someone that delivers such intense trauma. But
You know how comedians always, when they're on stage, they're laughing about the darkest stuff.
yeah.
Clearly, I've
Well,
taken inspiration. Yeah.
absolutely. So let's step back a bit before we get into specifics of the episodes. I want to talk about the challenges that you thought you would encounter as you came on board with a project like this, because it's got aliens, it has physics, very, very complex physics concepts. It's got deep emotions. I mean, it's just it's such a complex entire. I mean, that just seems like such a slight word for it, but it is a complicated, complex series. Tell me about the challenges that you were apprehensive about when you came on board.
Good question. I generally don't like to get pigeonholed with what I do,
Mhm.
so I like to kind of, you know, do psychological thrillers, do comedy dramas, do period, you know, uh, most genres. And the one that I hadn't really ticked, that I was desperate to rack my brain around, was a sort of big CG VFX type shows.
Mhm.
But it always has to come from a place of a story that I want to tell. So when I was approached to do this, I think that was both my biggest challenge and anxiety, but also the thing I was desperate to dive into. And if I was going to dive into it, I mean, let's go big. Let's go for the biggest set pieces available and with the greatest storytellers and showrunners in the form of Benioff, Weiss, and
Mhm.
Wu. So, in that respect, it was great. And I knew I'd be able to nail the character stuff without any hesitation. But VFX was a new world for me. And B, I confess I was not a science major on any level. So physics and me were like, I would constantly be scratching my head, and I dropped that subject as soon as I could at school. So that was, the other big challenge for me is, how do I best service this story?
Mhm.
Uh, but in a way, I thought actually it was good, because if I'm a layman in that world, hopefully I can convey that story to in a more accessible way to the audience.
Sure. So when you sat down and you started to plot these episodes out and think about how you were going to relay some of these concepts visually, and kind of what were the themes that you were going to really focus on, tell me about that collaboration with Benioff and Weiss and Wu and even Andrew Stanton and David Sang, was it?
Derek
Yeah,
saying,
Derek.
yeah,
Sorry, I knew it was a
yeah,
D.
yeah,
Tell me about the collaboration with other
yeah.
directors and with Benioff and Weiss and Wu.
So interestingly, you know, we, because it was such a big block that I was doing the
Mhm.
lion's share of the show. And Andrew actually came in for one episode, so I didn't see a lot of the other directors. I'd spent a bit of time with Derek, but really I was so kind of like under a bubble of major prep. It was a shame we didn't have as much time together as directors, but I come from a documentary background. I mean, I began
Mhm.
as a photographer, studied my master's in film directing, specializing in documentary. So whenever I approach a subject or a script, I always start from a place of truth.
Mhm.
And so, it was important to me, before I even sat down with David, Dan, and Alex, I wanted to understand the script on at its core level. So I spent a chunk of time with Matt Kenzie, Kenzie, our science advisor.
Mm.
And I spent a chunk of hours going through the logistics of this, because before I could pitch to David, Dan, and Alex how we could conceptualize this and actually turn words into pictures that make sense and tell the story, I needed to understand, even though it was a hypothetical invention, how it could work. So I
Right.
remember, it was COVID, so Matt, the science advisor, was on the other side of my desk, and he took a water bottle, and we were talking about, well, if we roll it, and we put string on it, and we started to talk about how would it come from under the water, and do we need to see deep sea divers? So I had all of this intel and possible hypotheses before I then went to David, Dan, and Alex to suggest how we start to break this down into bite-sized pieces that together would make up Judgment Day. So it was, a lot of episode 5 had huge numbers in it, but in a way, in order to really succeed, I had to take each one as its own separate entity and start to dissect that, and then start to find visual themes that I could tie in and bring to the next one. So
Sure.
it was amazing. And what I found with David, Dan, and Alex is bringing them visuals, bringing them storyboards, starting to actually make something tangible was a great asset, because then we could start having these really exciting riffing sessions where for example, I pitched to them about, why don't we see a deep sea diver disappearing under the water? We don't need to go under the water. We don't need to, break the bank with adding extra scenes to an already humongous episode. But what if we just inferred that there was a whole lot of activity underwater while all this stuff was going on above ground with Wade and Augie? So it was things like that, and then it's so exciting working with people like Benioff, Weiss, and Moye, because their brains are so brilliant brains, and so you just start to have these really exciting conversations about, what if we did this, and oh, why don't we try that? And you start to, it's like, I always compare it to when you're working on something so abstract or complex. When I was a photographer, and I'm getting on a bit, it was those manual cameras, and you'd have to, in a way, focus both extremes to find that pin sharp moment. And it's the same when you're exploring, how do you come up with a visual language for an abstract thought? You sort of almost have to swing the pendulum both ways until you find that sweet spot of where and how to tell that
Great.
part of the story. Yeah.
The collaboration sounds fantastic. So what I want to do is I want to dive into a couple of these episodes and into specific moments, because I'm a frustrated wannabe director that will never be a director. So I like to nerd out about this stuff just a little bit.
I love it.
Starting with episode 4, you have what essentially is a cult meeting, but we're not going to call it a cult meeting. We'll call it their convention. I don't know what the right word is, but where it's revealed that Yin
Ye
Wenjie, thank you, was the leader of this movement to bring the Santi to Earth. And then you've got the Jin coming into that room, then you've got everything breaking down, then you've got the gunfight. Talk to me about staging that sequence, because it starts very human-centered, and then very quickly it erupts into this mass chaos concentrated under this tent.
That's a great question. I mean, again, I think I always start from a place of truth and emotion. So to me, what would it feel like, that kind of betrayal? I mean, and being so blindsided. And I always like calm before the storm, because that's when you really you're just getting a lay of the land. as an audience, I think it's always interesting to look at pacing and rhythm of sequences in relation to what comes before and after it, so that actually you're really going on a physical and emotional journey as an audience. As a director, I think you really need to think about that and carve that out very specifically in the way you shoot something and the way you stage something. So, I mean, whether you remember or not, I was very specific about having quite a fluid but elegant camera coming into the equestrian center with a steady cam, a push and a pull, and coming in, it's very fluid and quite magical in terms of, you know, it looks like this kind of weird warehouse, but you get in and there's this classical music and there are all these people, these big high-tech screens and this really rather hypnotic visual going on. So that then it would, you know, it would pay off having that, you know, the big reveal first of Ye Wenjie, but then the FBI equivalent coming in, the Secret Service to you know, arrest all these cult leaders and their
so visually you're bringing people in to calm them down with those, you know, the music and the soothing, you know, animation and things that are going on, and then all of a sudden it's the action, it's the piercing that.
And I think I slightly amplified the personal nature of that moment where Ye Wenjie and Jin meet, and I wanted to have it quite charged, and that what I did was I had it feel quite emotional and motherly and grandmotherly when Ye Wenjie like is, I knew you'd come and I'm so pleased you're here kind of thing, and cuddle cuddle, and you get this look from Tatiana at, she's a bit jealous, why has she got more? Yeah. But what was so interesting and what I played on was that actually Ye Wenjie is quite a steely character. And so on the surface, she came across as this like beautiful, perfect grandma to these Oxford 5. So again, I do Steadicam at this point, whereas when the Secret Service come in, it's all handheld. But what I do is you know, you get this big moment close up, close and wide with Jin when she realizes and is completely punched in the stomach, seeing that it's Ye Wenjie. But when Ye Wenjie hugs her and then turns away, her face suddenly goes very hard again, steely. So it's important to me to have these private moments that neither one of them could see. So Ye Wenjie didn't see just how utterly devastated Jin was, in the same way that when Jin meets Ye and it's all warmth, as soon as Ye turns away, that steeliness comes back to the fore, and she gets on that stage and she's convincing them all that doesn't matter if you're going to die for a good cause. I mean, it's quite remarkable, her ability to switch off like that, the Ye Wenjie character. But you know, it was also, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to talk about the set design in that space, because that also fed into how I chose to shoot that sequence. Because on paper, the slug line was the equestrian center. I mean, what's an equestrian center? Could be anything or everything. And on the face of it, it was described as a cocktail party. But for me, I felt we needed to elevate it because there was so much going on. It was such a pivotal moment of the reveal that if we were just in some breeze block concrete gymnasium, it would kind of didn't do it for me. So I started to think about the fact that it was the game that had brought all these people together. And so clearly the Santi, even on planet Earth, were very advanced in there and had a lot of money. So that's when I sort of started to think about technology and, you know, my time at art school, and it all being a long time ago. video installations were like a big thing. So I sort of, what would the 21st century version, a simple version of that be? So then we started to think about screens and back projections and front projections, and I was thinking about how cool it would be to have those shadows of the characters and the police running through as silhouettes, and people in the foreground and playing with layers. So that also informed how I ended up shooting it. It was a ton of camera tests because of the nature of digital, and how the DP and my wonderful DP Martin Algren would be able to light the cast from these back projections or front projections without having to get other substantial lighting in, which would then negate the images. It would burn out the images on the screen. So there was a lot of technical stuff going on in order to achieve that. Yeah.
I love what you said about Ye Wenji and her steely countenance, because you think maybe she has changed, life has changed her from that woman that called in the 60s, I think it was 60s, decades ago, called the Santi, welcomed them to Earth, did that cold, extremely, putting the entire human race at risk. But she hasn't changed at all. It's the exact same woman. It's the same woman that I think almost emotionally died when she saw her father beaten in China at the very beginning of the episode of the season. I love that.
And it was interesting, just talking about that theme of Ye Wenji. It was, I was privileged to be able to do a lot of those episodes where things change for her. But I think it's also interesting that in episode 5, when she suddenly understands how Jonathan Pryce has messed up and also betrayed her, and not informed her about the moment that he's talking to the Santi, to Sophon, and talking about that, Red Riding Hood, and suddenly it's revealed that humans lie. So beautiful, these like layers of understanding of human nature, even for us to kind of suddenly abstract ourselves and think about who are we as human beings and how do we function. And God, yeah, we do deceive and we do lie. And even when we think something's just a simple white lie and we throw it away, the impact it has for somebody who was just looking at it almost like a child and saying, what do you mean you lie? Like, how can you do that? And so it was so beautiful being able to dissect all of that and the impact it was going to have on Ye. So that when I did that shot of her listening to Jonathan Pryce and realizing that he basically screwed it up for all of them, I did a similar camera move to echo. So in that scene where Jonathan, sorry, I'm diverting slightly from the Equestrian Centre Day, but it's just, I think it's worth just noting that on that scene with that fairy tale, he's basically talking to nobody. I had like 3-4 pages of dialogue and nothing to cut to other than a static stereo speaker.
Right.
And it's such an important scene, and I think we just need to sit quietly with it. So I decided to do what I call the insider shot of just a very slow travel around him. Like there's no escape. You see every twitch, every little move, every little blink. And as a photographer, I was already aware that we were going to be able, because he had glasses on, to play with the focal plane with that focus. And so it became this mesmerizing shot that I just didn't want to cut. I mean, I was just stayed on it, and we ended up staying on it a lot in the edit. But then I thought, wouldn't it be fun if when I shoot Ye Wenji listening to this, I do a similar. And so there's a lot of themes and camera moves that I'm trying to marry these moments together.
I love that.
Subconscious.
And that was perfect that you went into that scene with Jonathan Pryce Evans talking to, relaying the story of Little Red Riding Hood, because that was actually one of my next questions. I just wanted to talk about the complexities of that scene, because it is a monumental scene in which it changes everything for the series. It's deceptively simple on the surface, but you've already talked about the complexities that went into creating that, and where you're forecasting, returning to similar movements later.
I mean, I remember when I was prepping that scene, I was nervous. I was nervous because there was all these bells and whistles and all sorts of sexiness and loveliness and big stuff. But, it's those small, private, quiet moments that ultimately I just live for, because that's when a director can't hide. If you don't get that performance right, if you don't pitch it correctly, if you don't cover it properly, you're screwed. Because it is such a vital piece to how everything unfolds. But I was nervous. I was nervous because I had, as I say, just a speaker. So, it was also an interesting challenge because I wanted to see Sophon to be there in the room, or at least speak the words, so he wasn't just going to get a reader,
Right.
because it was but it was hard for Jonathan to hear her, and there are all sorts of technical challenges when you as a director want to bring the other actor into the equation. But I thought ultimately it was vital, and Jonathan was thrilled for it, and so was C, who played Sophon, because people forget, even phone calls, getting the script to you or somebody to just read it is so different from having the real deal do it. So I felt with such an important scene, we needed to make sure both sides of the conversation were in hearing distance. Yeah.
I love using that personal connection, that personal touch to help, not that of course, Jonathan Pryce could deliver it realistically, but just to give it that extra touch that that there's a personal connection there, and that he has been talking to her for years and years and years. So, or them, or whatever the pronoun the Sun team would use.
But I remember, Jonathan, it's quite a hard thing to get your head around as an actor. Like, what am I doing? Who am I talking to? We were having these conversations early on, like trying to ground it so that he could deliver what we needed him to deliver, and not feel like he was just not talking to somebody he knew. It needed to feel personal. It needed to feel like they were familiar with each other. Yeah.
So I want to move on to episode 5, Judgment Day. The Panama Canal. I mean, to say that I was so into the series, and getting to this scene and just realizing my brain was running behind probably everybody else, but then realizing what the nanofibers really were doing, what they were planning, and then seeing it so vividly captured, and the horror, and knowing there's children on this boat. There's just people who believe in a movement, and they're just being slaughtered. When you plan for something like that, was there ever a concern that, how much do I show? How much do I not? Do I pull back? What was that conversation like coming into filming it?
Yeah, it's a really valid challenge and question, because nobody needs to see unnecessary violence on television, let alone children being massacred. But you need to emotionally charge the audience. And to me, this was a family, this was a community on that ship. An innocent party. Okay, for whatever reasons, they felt the Santi was the future. But Tatiana grew up on that ship as a young child. I wanted us to understand the normality that existed within this community, that it wasn't just a bunch of freaks. So even though it wasn't necessarily well documented in this sequence, I put a lot of it in there. For example, when the hose guy, Jose, is hosing, it's our first moment. That was it in the script. And I suggested to the boys, let's put kids in that basketball court. Let's fill that. I don't want to see them die. I don't want to see them splice.
Right.
But that moment of just watching, and of course, they don't understand it either. And, saying we learn from children when we go into new locations, they look up and we suddenly are reminded how to look at the world with all its wonderment. That's the moment I wanted to also convey. Because, we as adults are already tainted by life, right? But these young children are watching this helicopter suddenly get spliced, and it's, some of them run, but some of them just watch in awe. And, this as a side note, I was in the tsunami. And so when you watch how people deal with disaster and, disaster, let's just call it that for now. It's not all one note.
Right.
Everyone deals with it differently.
Sure.
And so I wanted to make sure that there were some that ran, there were some that fought, and there were some who froze. So that kid that just stands through that herring fencing, whatever it's called, and just watches, and we as an audience know, or will know pretty soon, he's a goner. I mean, they're all a goner, but it was important to me. So I kind of probably was a bit more massaging the emotions more than were on the page, but it felt necessary to me in order, I remember years ago I went to a student film festival in Tel Aviv, and there was this really powerful short film about prisoners of war and torture, and the camera and the director never went into the room, but you sat with the next prisoner that was about to go into that torture chamber. And you just heard the atrocities and you just heard the pain. And of course, our minds go way darker than what the camera can show.
Right.
So, I took inspiration from that, of inferring and then leaving. So the same with the canteen, the calm before the storm, making sure that we had young kids having a laugh, having their breakfast, laughing with the nanny or the mum or whoever it was, and picking up their food, and just life is sweet, everything's normal. And meanwhile, you see the ticking bomb. Evan sat in his office, frustrated. Sopan's not answering him. This is like 24 hours and he's not getting any response. So he knows, and then he comes out, he talks to his executive assistant, and you see that sinister splicing of those paper dolls. And again, that was another nod to kids. Kids inhabit this space.
Right.
And this creeping disaster monster coming towards both of them. Yeah.
It's the backpacks too. There are backpacks, I think, that are spliced, and clocks. I mean, it's that you don't hold on it long, but it is that 5 seconds of pending disaster, because you are anticipating the what you've already seen, which is the people being essentially cutting in half and falling down because gravity. But it's that dread that is, and what I also love about the sequence is the sound design. There's very little music. It is all about the sounds of the ship falling apart, and that is unmistakably, that is nightmare inducing in the best possible way.
Yeah. And don't forget, we also played with the sound between the observation truck that they were in, observing it all, and the reality on the ship and outside the ship. And it was interesting, just going back to the backpacks a second, we had this incredible SFX team, Mike Dawson and his team, that did Game of Thrones with the boys. So I was in really good hands. But I remember throwing lots of curveballs at them, because to me, not curveballs, but challenges, because for me, if this became a complete VFX sequence, it was game over for me. It needed to feel so real and so tangible and so present that it was more horrifying, because as soon as you think it's all computer generated, I lose the investment. Of course, I'm going to amplify it with VFX, and they did a tremendous job with it. But I remember going to Mike's warehouse, and we brainstormed before this, me, myself, the boys, Deb, the production designer, Mike, coming up, and Bernie, coming up with all sorts of ideas, including backpacks. And then he gave us a show and tell. And what happened the first time was, when he spliced the bags, they just dropped. And the contents just dropped. It was just like a big like a brick coming down. I said, Mike, we're going to have to rethink this, or at least let's look at what we put in the backpacks. Let's, like, say they had an arts and crafts class, so they're like colored feathers, so they will float down, and so we put different weighted things in the rucksacks, so that there was a kind of dance to the way things fell.
Right.
The same with, we tested fire extinguishers, those pipes with steam, the fluorescent, the overhead lights. And what was fantastic was, if you were to like just be an observer, like, just be like a fly on the wall and watch this sequence as we were filming it. It was mental. There were like 20 SFX guys with strings and magnets, and because you had to trigger a magnet for the light to fall. You had to. It's actually really complicated. The tables had to be yanked all at the same time, and in order to get the timing right, in prep we got Mike to create an LED strip that he would lay along the corridor, and we would time it out. We'd run down the corridor, because we also had to make sure that it was feasible that Evans could outrun the nanofiber long enough to get the hard drive.
Right.
So it was all about making it feel believable that a ship wouldn't travel that slowly, but at the same time wasn't too fast that Evans would. There's no way Jonathan Pryce could have outrun it. So there are lots of logistical things going on as well with it, and it was 50 minutes each reset. So I had to be really, time is not my friend or anyone's friend on set, but definitely not a director. So having to know exactly what my shots were and what I needed. And I always said I needed a handheld sequence as well, and time was ticking, and I had to make sure that I left enough time to do a handheld shot running with the Santi community as they feel the nanofibers. Yeah.
I love that idea of different weighted items within the backpacks, because something that falls more slowly echoes the fact that they are all very slowly proceeding toward their death. I mean, it plays with time, right? Because I said before, you've got those takes down the hall where it's very slowly moving there. And then, it's not a long sequence, but it's almost like you slow down time artificially through things that are displayed there within the scene, right? You enhance that dread. Same 5 seconds, but by showing something fall slowly, it gives it the feeling of stretching it out.
100%. You've hit the nail on the head. It was, it was a discussion we had about taking the liberty of stretching time a bit for the sequence, and it was it was quite a lengthy discussion, because you need to be careful when you do that with an audience. Like, you need to earn it, and I felt with this sequence we could. Yeah. But yeah, it's you've nailed it. That's exactly what it was all about. Yeah.
So you leave the horror, the physical trauma of episode 5, Judgment Day, and then we go into the emotional trauma of episode 6, and more specifically the relationship between Will and Jin. And he is dying of cancer, pancreatic cancer. She doesn't know, and then she does know, and then she doesn't know that he's in love with her, and that he's basically giving everything that he has to her. when I spoke to Alex Sharp and I told him, I don't know if you've ever heard of this book, but his character reminded me of the book The Giving Tree by Shel Silverstein, because it's this boy who approaches a tree and loves the tree, and the tree loves the boy, and the tree gives him his leaves, lets him cut him down for branches to make a boat or something like that. And basically that the tree just allows itself to be destroyed because it loves that boy so much. And it's a children's book. It totally ripped me apart when I read it and read it to my kids. But it's Will Downing's story. He is giving himself away down to his brain because
Yeah,
of his love for Jin.
yeah.
Talk to me about working with Jess Hong and Alex Sharp on those sequences, particularly that beautiful scene on the coast with the origami swans. Is it
They were boats.
boats? That's origami
Boats.
boats.
Um, it was so lovely. It was such a gift to me to be able to do those extreme episodes and then be handed this very emotionally charged, delicate sequence or story episode. And I think in something that I spoke a lot with the boy David, Dan, and Alex about was, if we don't invest in these characters as an audience, why do we
Exactly.
watch?
100%.
Yeah. And so, we can have all these fantastic sequences. And don't get me wrong, I loved every minute of doing Judgment Day. And it was a huge gift, and also a huge relief that it worked, having, not being somebody that sits within naturally, or known to be somebody that sits within the VFX CG world. So it was great to be able to now be able to fly that flag and say, I can do this too. But with this episode, what was also interesting is many of these actors had not been each other's scene partners that there were, like, maybe I could count on one hand how many scenes they were all together with. One in episode 1, one in episode 3, and now one in a chunk of sequences in episode 6. So, it was lovely. We were filming not far from Brighton, Seven Sisters, I think it was called. It's a stunning coastline. And I spent a lot of time on, like, one-on-one with the actors too. And I spoke quite a lot with Alex. Now, you probably know Alex did an extreme diet on this show. He probably spoke to you about that. And you also have to understand, when somebody has a limited set of calories in them, you need to also navigate that as a director, because he's sharp as a button, no pun intended, Alex Sharp, but he is, and he's so gifted, and he was so committed to this part and this role and this story. But it was really important to keep his brain active when it would sometimes go places because of lack of calories.
Right.
And I did the same with Jess. I spent a lot of time with Jess because this wasn't a natural place for her to get into those deep, emotionally painful places. She's a very happy woman. She smiles a lot. She laughs a lot. And I had to take her to places that, in a way, she wasn't always happy to go to, or want to go to, or, like, naturally go to. And I was like, look, this is somewhere I need both of you to get to. And at times I would give her a very specific note that I wouldn't give Alex, and I wouldn't let Alex know where I was going. Because to me, sometimes there is something fresh about giving a note to an actor that throws them off a bit, but throws them off in the right direction, but takes them out of their comfort zone. But what it also does, it makes your scene partner stay on their toes, because they're not expecting that. And so there's something really interesting when you want to sometimes get an unexpected moment to play those kind of directorial avenues. Yeah, yeah. But it was fantastic having the chance to do some quiet moments like that and to really allow them to sit in that painful, unexpected place.
Yeah. I mean, you underscored it so well, because, you know, that's exactly the way that I approached it too, that I looked at it too, is none of this would mean anything if you didn't care about the characters, plain and simple. And you do. And it's handled so well by you and other directors and by the actors. Last question for you. You know, from every interaction I think we have, I always think we learn something, we take something from that experience. What did you take away from these 3 episodes of Three Body Problem that you would perhaps, you know, subconsciously or consciously use on your next project?
That I'm a VFX queen now.
Bring on House of the Dragon.
Correct. I mean, like, I feel like the world is my oyster now, and I think what's brilliant is that we are becoming more. You know, television is a remarkable medium. We are able to take risks in ways that we couldn't maybe 10 years ago.
Sure.
But we're also in a very ambitious medium, so world building is everything. So now being able to go so confidently into any project now, understanding the VFX of it all, the CG of it all, and know that obviously I feel very comfortable with actors and creating hopefully stellar performances. But that was the one string to my bow, the VFX of it all, that I needed to master, and I couldn't have asked for a better team to do it with. I mean, David, Dan, and Alex were tremendous team players and supporters and champions of mine. So that was my best takeaway, working with them.
It's very useful these days to have in your toolkit.
Yeah.
Well, Minkie, thank you so much for the time. Thank you for these 3 episodes. You did a brilliant job on it. I still getting over the Judgment Day sequence, but maybe that's for me and the therapist. No, I'm kidding. Take care and have a great rest of your day, and best of luck to you.
I really appreciate this. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.